COVID has changed the way that we view and analyze risk. What I'd like to do over the next 45 minutes is analyze a whole variety of risks with a focus on those involving labor and international trade, and provide you with a better understanding of what's occurred and what's likely to occur. A whole variety of factors on the horizon, again, pushing GDP up, some pushing GDP down, and we have to recognize that knowledge is today's only sustainable competitive advantage. The thing is, we don't know what the jobs of the future will be, but we do know they will require highly, highly skilled workers. So for the first time in my life, workers now are really in the driver's seat as opposed to the HR department. When you talk to CEOs, as we all know, the skills deficit is the #1 concern on their minds. What can companies do to attract more workers and retain them longer? Well, #1 is that U.S. schools attract the world's brightest and best students. We educate them, then we send them home to compete against us. People talk about immigrants taking American jobs. Statistically, they really don't. They actually help fill the openings. When population declines, you have fewer consumers, you have fewer producers, your GDP drops, and standards of living will then follow. We need to create an environment that encourages entrepreneurs to take risks. Because when they take risks, they start new companies. And when they start new companies, they create more jobs. The opioid crisis has just destroyed rural areas and had a very negative impact on participation rates. You got a job, you hope that if you worked really, really hard, maybe in a year and a half you'd get a promotion, and maybe in 3 years you'd get an office with a window. Millennials want to know what they're going to get next Thursday. Globalization is not dead, globalization is not dying, but globalization is evolving. I like to say globalization is like fire. It can keep you warm, cook your food, or burn your house down. And I've always argued that the benefits of trade really are not very well understood. I've had members of Congress often pull me aside and say, John, I understand that this piece of legislation is very beneficial, but it's so goddamn complicated. I can't sell that economic reality in my congressional district. We have 14 free trade agreements with 20 countries. Almost half of all our exports go to those 20 countries. What does that tell you? I looked at a study not long ago of 125 countries, and those over a period of about 14 years, those with the higher tariffs, generally had smaller surpluses. So that logic is history. That 40% of that content in that Mexican product was actually U.S. content. It could be your products going down to Mexico, being incorporated in the production, then coming back to the U.S., so on average 40%. Does that mean we should lop off 40% of the trade deficit? So big question. If you still want access to 512 million European Union consumers, are you still going to invest in the UK? GM sells more cars in China than it sells in the US. US policy really needs to reflect the fact that US companies need access to the Chinese market. When President Trump bumped up trade barriers, what does President Xi have to do to save face? Is the decoupling strategy optimal outside of sensitive high technology areas? There's a whole number of strategies I think the US can employ. What happens when you pull subsidies from industry? Very often you have a higher unemployment rate. What do the Chinese fear more than anything? I mean, President Xi is walking a tightrope, which is more like a high wire act. But due to black swans, you can't entirely rely on any one country. And I remember going from West Berlin to East Berlin in March 1990, like going into a time warp. I went back into 1947. And you saw what happened and how socialism doesn't work. Extremely important, and we want to keep that middle class from shrinking. And so you don't have a vote next time around far, far left.